So, a few weeks ago, or really a few months ago, I had this idea to try to make the most sensible Windows XP machine I could make. And that involved taking an i5 third generation Optiplex and loading XP on it. Now, there were four graphics cards I had in mind, and these are them. I built the machine with R7 250. That would be this one. It's a nice card, XFX, really cheap, has a VGA header, which is something I wanted for the machine. I like it a lot. It's a good card, and it ran everything I wanted except Crysis. To be honest, my personal view of Crysis is that it's an important game, but it actually wasn't a game I played a lot of when it came out. It was almost more of a technology test than anything else. I know it was a game too, but at least at the time, I couldn't run it well. Most people couldn't. And I didn't even want to try, to be honest. Of course, it's been a long time since 2007, so I wanted to try three NVIDIA cards as well. First one, kind of infamous, the GT 730. Now this is a DDR3 model, which was a Kepler model, I believe. Kind of hated in a lot of circles. It's a very common, cheap card. But I figured it could be interesting, give it a shot. Maybe it's actually better of old games. And by the way, if you want to play games from 2002, this is all you need. Now, the next one is something I was very excited about. This is the Quadro K620. Now, the Quadro K620 is really a GTX 745 in a low-profile, low-power package. It has 2 gigs of RAM, has DisplayPort and DVI. Unfortunately, you see the header for VGA is there, but unlike the previous two cards, it's not populated. I don't know if I could put it on, but it's so much easier to use a DVI to VGA adapter if that's what I want. Unregardless, I figured this would be interesting because the 750 Ti is what people usually recommend for the ultimate XP experience. It's not the fastest possible card, but it's common and cheap. It'll blow away anything you throw at it. This is most of what is to a 750 Ti in a low-profile package for a fraction of the cost. But there's one other card I wanted to try. This is the Quadro K1200. Now, this is just 4 main DisplayPort out. It also has 4 gigs of RAM, which is a little crazy when you consider, DDR5 video RAM. When you consider that Windows XP maxes out at 4 gigs of RAM. That said, it works fine in Windows XP. It just can't address a lot of that RAM, and that's a whole issue in and of itself. Unregardless, this is the most expensive of the bunch, but not that expensive by any means. It's a K1200. This is closer to a 750 with 4 gigs of RAM. So what I wanted to do was to test all of these out, see how they do in 3D Mark 2005, which is the benchmark I figure represents the era I want to be testing, see how they run in Crysis, and generally give them a few other tests and see how they do. So this is my rundown of the graphics cards you can also use in a sensible Windows XP machine. As a little reminder, this is the sensible Windows XP machine. It's a Dell Optiplex 7010, 3rd gen, i5. I put in dual channel RAM. It's 8 gigs, which is overkill for XP, but honestly, RAM is so cheap, why not? Has the Intel standard cooler. I decided to get an i5 and not an i7. I frankly figure that the i5 is plenty for Windows XP. And of course I put in X5 Extreme Gamer, which I think is really the absolute best card for the job here. And so SSD, usual stuff. Total damage for this machine was under $100. So I tried running 3D Mark 2005 first. This is a synthetic test. It's not perfect, but it's a nice way of showing performance. At least on this test, what you see is that the GT 730 comes in dead last. Given that these other cards are so cheap, there's really no reason to get one. The AMD card isn't actually that far from a GT 730, which was a little disappointing. On the other hand, the K620 is pretty far ahead, and the K1200 is about a 20-30% advantage over the K620. So running the 3D Mark 2005 test in greater detail just revealed more of the same, to be honest. The GT730 was dead last in every case. Performance, frankly, wasn't really acceptable. The AMD card did better, but 20-30% better. There's been a big jump to the K620. The K620 is really a much, much better performer, much more interesting in these high-end titles from the late XP era. And the K1200 is better still, about 20-30% better than the K620. Both the K620 and the K1200 have excellent performance in any game you're going to throw at it. I should comment these are all run at 1080p with 2x anti-aliasing enabled. So as mentioned, the AMD card really didn't want to run Crysis. It might have been a mistake on my end, configuration, not sure. But I did put all of NVIDIA cards through Crysis. This is running, once again, 1080p, medium settings, and the results were pretty clear. The GT730 DDR3 it can handle it. It's playable, averaging 30 FPS, but just not that impressive. The K620 is a huge step up at over 60 FPS average. The lows aren't bad. It's going to be extremely playable. The K1200 is about 20% faster. It gets you to about 80 FPS in the benchmark. So the last thing I did was I ran the Fear benchmark, 1080p, everything maxed out. And I decided to see just how the K620 and K1200 matched up. For starters, they're both excessive for this, which is nice because they're both quite cheap cards. The K620 and K1200 had minimums of over 100. The average was about 170 on the K620 and about 220, 230 on the K1200, and ridiculous maximums. Realistically, both of these cards are excessive for running this game, and since Fear is one of the most demanding games of the XP era, they're excessive for anything you want to run. So there you have it. These are all extremely cheap cards. You can get an R7 250 for like $15. You can get the GT730 for more like $20, and the Quadro K620 you can get every day of the week for $20 delivered in the United States. The K1200 is a $33, $34 card, but I did a best offer for $30. You can probably get it to around there too. $10 isn't a big difference. If you're planning on running games that actually use that 4 gigabytes of memory, definitely get the K1200. For Windows XP, to be honest, the K620 is more than enough. I also personally like that it has the DVI header, the DVI port that you can use for VGA as well. Use it with a analog monitor, CRT monitor, no problem. Honestly, for playing XP games up to Crysis, any of these are a good choice. Happy gaming.